I never thought a simple tennis match would change my entire life. There I was, sitting courtside at Roland Garros, watching Rafael Nadal serve what could be the match point, when my phone buzzed with a text that would flip my world upside down. But let me back up a bit, because this story starts way before that moment in Paris. My name is Kenneth Thompson, and for 8 years, I'd been pouring my soul into Peterson and Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm in Manhattan. I wasn't just another employee. I was the guy who stayed until the lights automatically shut off, the one who came in on Saturdays to perfect campaigns that nobody else cared about. My colleagues used to joke that I had a sleeping bag under my desk, and honestly, some nights it felt like I might as well have. The Peterson and Associates office on the 32nd floor had this view of Central Park that made all those late nights feel worth it. I'd stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows around midnight, watching the city lights twinkle, and think about how I was building something meaningful. My specialty was digital marketing analytics, and I had this weird gift for spotting trends before they became obvious to everyone else. Numbers spoke to me in a way that made my wife Jennifer roll her eyes, but it's what made me good at my job. Take the summer breakthrough campaign I developed for our biggest client, Meridian Fitness. While everyone else was pushing traditional gym membership ads, I noticed this emerging pattern in social media engagement around micro-workouts and home fitness. I spent 3 weeks diving deep into the data, creating algorithms that could predict viral fitness content with 87% accuracy. The campaign I built around these insights increased Meridian's membership signups by 300% in just 2 months. But here's the thing about success. Sometimes it makes you a target instead of a hero. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. Like when my boss, Mark Peterson, the founder's nephew, who'd somehow climbed to VP of operations despite having the strategic vision of a goldfish, started taking credit for my work in client meetings. Or when I'd submit detailed reports on Monday morning, only to hear Mark presenting my exact ideas to the board on Tuesday, with my name mysteriously absent from any documentation. The worst part wasn't even the stolen credit. It was coming home at 11:30 p.m. to find my 6-year-old daughter, Sarah, already asleep. Again, I'd sneak into her room, careful not to wake her, and just watch her tiny chest rise and fall. Sometimes I'd find drawings she'd made for me taped to her bedroom door, stick figures of our family, always with Daddy conspicuously absent from whatever fun activity she'd imagined. "Kenneth, we need to talk," Jennifer said one particularly brutal Thursday night as I microwaved leftover takeout. She was sitting at our kitchen table, still in her scrubs from her nursing shift, looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her 12-hour day at Mount Sinai. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I already knew. "Sarah asked me today why her daddy doesn't live here anymore." Jennifer's voice was steady, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "I told her you do live here," and she said, "but I never see him when I'm awake." That hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat down across from her, suddenly not hungry anymore. "Jen, I'm doing this for us, for Sarah's college fund, for the house in Westchester we've been talking about." "I don't want a house in Westchester if it means our daughter grows up thinking her father is a ghost," she interrupted. "I married Kenneth Thompson, not Peterson and Associates. I promised her things would change after the Meridian campaign wrapped up. I promised I'd start setting boundaries, taking actual lunch breaks, maybe even using some of those vacation days that had been accumulating like dust on my desk. But promises are easy to make at midnight in your kitchen, and a lot harder to keep when your boss is breathing down your neck about quarterly projections. The irony is that I actually believed Mark valued my work. He'd pat me on the back after successful campaigns, talking about how I was essential to the team and how big things were coming for employees who showed my level of dedication. I ate it up like an idiot, working even harder, staying even later, missing even more bedtime stories. But then came the French client situation. Beaumont Luxury, this high-end fashion house from Paris, had been courting Peterson and Associates for months. It would have been our biggest international account, worth potentially $2 million in annual revenue. I'd spent weeks researching the European luxury market, building demographic models, creating presentation materials that I genuinely believed could win us the contract. The morning of the big presentation, I showed up to the office at 6 a.m. to do final prep work. I had my laptop bag, my backup presentation on a USB drive, and enough coffee in my system to power a small town. I was ready. Mark didn't even look at me when I walked into the conference room. "Thompson, slight change of plans," he said, not bothering to glance up from his phone. "Jake's going to be taking point on the Beaumont presentation." Jake Martinez, who'd been at the company for exactly 18 months and whose idea of market research was scrolling through Instagram for 10 minutes. Jake, who I'd literally trained on our analytics software because he couldn't figure out how to generate a basic engagement report. "I'm sorry, what?" I stood there with my laptop bag still slung over my shoulder, certain I'd misheard. "You've been spread pretty thin lately," Mark continued, finally looking at me with this expression of fake concern that made my skin crawl. "We think it's better if you focus on the domestic accounts for now. Let Jake handle the international expansion." The domestic accounts, meaning the 3 small businesses we'd been managing for years, worth maybe $50,000 total in annual fees. Meanwhile, Jake was about to walk into a meeting with materials I'd created, presenting strategies I'd developed for a client I'd been cultivating for months. I wanted to say something. I wanted to point out that Jake couldn't pronounce demographic segmentation correctly, let alone explain it to French executives. I wanted to ask why the hell I'd been working 70-hour weeks if my reward was getting sidelined on the biggest opportunity of the year. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Of course, whatever's best for the team." Because that's what you do when you're 34 years old with a mortgage and a 6-year-old daughter and health insurance that you can't afford to lose. You swallow your pride, smile like it doesn't hurt, and pretend that watching someone else present your work to executives is totally fine. Jake got the Beaumont contract. Mark made sure everyone knew it was Jake's brilliant strategy that sealed the deal. At the company-wide meeting the following Monday, Mark even used the phrase "fresh perspective" when describing Jake's approach. Like the months I'd spent on preliminary research had somehow made my ideas stale. I started documenting everything after that. Every email, every meeting, every casual conversation where Mark would pump me for ideas, only to present them as his own the next day. I created a folder on my personal laptop called Insurance and backed up every piece of work I'd done, every client communication I'd been involved in, every late-night revision I'd made to save Mark's ass when his strategies inevitably fell apart. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I just had this growing feeling that I needed to protect myself. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, during my monthly check-in call with my mother in Milwaukee. Mom had this way of asking innocent questions that cut straight to the heart of whatever I was avoiding thinking about. "So, Kenny, how's work going? Are you still enjoying it there?" she asked. and I could hear her puttering around her kitchen, probably making her famous banana bread while we talked. "Yeah, Mom, it's going well," I lied, staring out my office window at the construction site across the street. "That's wonderful, honey. And when do you think you might get that promotion you've been working toward? It's been quite a while now, hasn't it?" 8 years. I'd been at Peterson and Associates for 8 years, watching people with half my experience and a quarter of my results get promoted around me like I was invisible. Meanwhile, my college roommate Tom had just made partner at his law firm, and my neighbor Steve had started his own consulting business and was pulling in more money than I'd probably ever see. "These things take time, Mom," I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Well, I'm sure they appreciate all your hard work. You've always been such a dedicated boy. Your father would be so proud." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about my dad. He'd been a machinist at the Harley-Davidson plant in Milwaukee, worked there for 37 years until the day he retired. Never got rich, never got famous, but he was respected. His colleagues knew his name, valued his opinion, treated him like the skilled craftsman he was. I wondered what he'd think about his son spending 8 years at a company where his biggest accomplishments were credited to other people. That's when I decided to take some of those accumulated vacation days. Jennifer had been begging me to plan a real trip, something that didn't involve checking emails every 20 minutes or taking client calls from the hotel lobby. I'd been entering this company raffle for months. Peterson and Associates had some deal with a sports travel company, and every quarter they'd give away tickets to major sporting events. When my name got drawn for Roland Garros tickets, it felt like a sign. "You're actually going to take the time off?" Jennifer asked when I told her about Paris. We were in Sarah's room, reading her bedtime story together for the first time in weeks. 5 whole days, I promised. No laptop, no client calls, just me, some French coffee, and hopefully watching some incredible tennis. Sarah looked up from her picture book, eyes wide with excitement. "Daddy, can you bring me back something from Paris?" "What would you like, Princess?" She thought for a moment, then grinned. "A French teddy bear, and maybe some of those fancy cookies." "Macarons," Jennifer corrected with a smile. "And yes, Daddy will definitely bring you both." For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about something that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or conversion rates. I should have known Mark would find a way to ruin it. The flight to Paris was smooth, and I'd actually managed to turn off my work phone for the entire 8-hour journey. I spent the time reading an actual book. Not a business strategy guide or marketing manual, but a thriller novel that Jennifer had been recommending for years. It felt weirdly rebellious, like I was getting away with something. My hotel in the 7th arrondissement was nothing fancy, but it had this tiny balcony that overlooked a tree-lined street where locals walked their dogs and bought fresh bread from the boulangerie downstairs. For the first time in years, I woke up naturally instead of to an alarm, had coffee that I actually tasted instead of chugging while checking emails, and took a long shower without worrying about being late for anything. The Roland Garros tournament was everything I'd hoped it would be. The clay courts, the passionate French crowd, the incredible skill of watching the world's best tennis players compete at the highest level. I'd managed to get tickets for the men's final, and the atmosphere was electric. But here's where the story gets interesting, and where that whole universe has a plan thing really started to make sense. I was settling into my seat, courtside, Section B, Row 4. when I noticed the man next to me looked familiar. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit that somehow looked casual. The kind of confident bearing that screamed, successful executive. It took me a moment to place him, but when he ordered a coffee in perfect French, it clicked. Robert Walker, CEO of Walker Industries. Walker Industries was Peterson and Associates' biggest competitor in the New York market. They were everything we pretended to be. Innovative, client-focused, known for treating their employees like human beings instead of productivity machines. I'd been following their campaigns for years, partly for competitive intelligence, and partly because I genuinely admired their work. And here was their CEO, sitting close enough that I could see him checking his phone between sets. "Incredible match," I said during a break in play, figuring there was no harm in making polite conversation. Robert turned to me with a genuine smile. "Absolutely. Nadal's serving like his life depends on it. Are you here for work or pleasure?" "Pleasure," I said, and it felt good to mean it. "First real vacation I've taken in, well, longer than I care to admit. You?" "Bit of both. We have a small Paris office, so I try to combine business trips with something enjoyable when possible." He extended his hand. "Robert Walker." I shook it, hoping my surprise didn't show too much on my face. "Kenneth Thompson. Nice to meet you." We chatted casually about the match, about Paris, about the differences between French and American business culture. Robert was surprisingly down to earth for a CEO, asking genuine questions and actually listening to the answers. When I mentioned I worked in marketing, his interest seemed to peak. "What kind of marketing?" he asked as Nadal lined up for what looked like a crucial serve. "Digital analytics primarily. I work for Peterson and Associates in Manhattan." Robert's expression shifted slightly, though he kept it polite. "Peterson and Associates. I know them by reputation." Something in his tone made me curious, but before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I almost ignored it. This was supposed to be my disconnected time after all, but the name on the screen made my stomach drop. Mark Peterson. I glanced at Robert, who was politely focused on the match, and opened the message. "You're fired. Clear out your desk by Monday." I stared at the screen, certain I was misreading something. But before I could process what was happening, another message came through. "Pathetic employees, like you don't deserve success. Clean out your locker and don't expect a reference." The tennis match continued around me, but suddenly I couldn't hear anything except the blood rushing in my ears. 8 years. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, sacrificed weekends, stolen credit, and swallowed pride. And this was how it ended. Not with a conversation, not with an explanation, not even with the basic human decency of a phone call. A text message, while I was on vacation, while I was sitting at a tennis match in Paris, trying to remember what it felt like to be a human being instead of a productivity unit. "Everything all right?" Robert asked quietly, and I realized I must have made some kind of sound. I looked at him. This CEO, who probably treated his employees like actual people, who probably didn't fire them via text message while they were on their first vacation in years, and made a decision that would change everything. "Actually," I said, turning my phone screen toward him, "I think I might be having the worst day of my professional life. Or maybe the best. I'm honestly not sure yet." Robert read the messages, and his expression darkened in a way that made me think Mark Peterson had just made a very serious enemy. "Kenneth," he said slowly, "I think you and I need to have a conversation." Robert Walker stared at my phone screen for a long moment, then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Around us, the crowd erupted as Nadal won another crucial point, but the celebration felt distant, like we were sitting in a bubble separate from the rest of the stadium. "Kenneth," Robert said finally, his voice measured, but carrying an undercurrent of something that might have been anger. "How long have you been working for Mark Peterson?" 8 years, I replied automatically, still feeling like this conversation was happening to someone else. "Started right out of business school. And in those 8 years, have you been happy there?" It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had asked me if I was happy at work? When was the last time I'd even asked myself? "I thought I was building something," I said slowly. "I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough times, if I just kept putting in the hours and delivering results." I trailed off, realizing how naive that sounded when spoken out loud. Robert nodded like he'd heard this story before. "Let me guess. Your ideas get presented by other people. Your successes become team victories while your mistakes become personal failures. You're essential until you're inconvenient." The accuracy of his assessment was unsettling. "You know Mark?" "I know his type." Robert's jaw tightened slightly. "I've been in this business for 25 years, Kenneth. I've seen plenty of Mark Petersons. They're parasites who build their careers on the backs of people like you, then discard you the moment you become inconvenient or start asking for what you're worth." On the court, the match continued, but I was completely absorbed in this conversation. Here was a man who ran a company I'd admired from afar, speaking truths about my professional life that I'd been too close to see clearly. "The Meridian Fitness campaign," Robert continued, "the one that increased their membership by 300% last quarter. That was yours, wasn't it?" I stared at him. "How did you know about—" "Because we pitched for that account too. Our team spent weeks trying to figure out how Peterson and Associates managed to identify micro-workout trends 3 months before they became mainstream. The analytics work was brilliant. Too brilliant for Mark Peterson. The pieces were starting to click together. You've been watching our campaigns." "I've been watching your campaigns," Robert corrected. "There's a signature to really good analytical work, Kenneth. It's like a fingerprint. Once you learn to recognize it, you can spot it anywhere. Your insights on consumer behavior patterns, your predictive modeling for social media engagement. That's not Mark Peterson's work. That's not even close to Mark Peterson's intellectual capacity." I felt a strange mix of validation and embarrassment. On one hand, someone had finally noticed my actual contributions. On the other hand, I'd been so naive that even my competitors could see through Mark's charade. "So, what happens now?" I asked, holding up my phone with those brutal text messages still glowing on the screen. Robert was quiet for a moment, watching Nadal prepare for another serve. When he spoke, his voice was casual, but I could sense the calculation behind it. "Well, that depends. What do you want to happen?" "I want to go home to my wife and daughter and figure out how to explain that Daddy got fired via text message while watching tennis in Paris," I said, surprised by the bitterness in my own voice. "That's one option," Robert agreed. "Or—" He paused as the crowd cheered another spectacular rally. "You could consider this the best thing that ever happened to your career." I laughed. but there was no humor in it. Getting fired via text is the best thing that ever happened to my career? No, Robert said, turning to look at me directly. Meeting me is. For the next hour, as Rafael Nadal systematically dismantled his opponent to claim another French Open title, Robert Walker systematically dismantled everything I thought I knew about my professional worth. He'd been tracking my work for months, he explained, trying to figure out who was really behind Peterson and Associates' recent uptick in innovative campaigns. We've been looking for a senior director of marketing analytics, he said, as the crowd began to disperse around us. Someone who understands both the technical side and the strategic implications. Someone who can build predictive models, but also translate them into actionable campaigns. The salary range is $160 to $220, depending on experience. I nearly choked on my celebratory champagne. I was currently making $95,000 at Peterson and Associates, after 8 years and exactly 2 raises that barely kept pace with inflation. Plus equity, full benefits, 4 weeks vacation that we actually expect you to take, and a team of junior analysts who report directly to you. Robert continued like he was discussing the weather. We believe in work-life balance at Walker Industries. Our philosophy is that people do their best work when they have actual lives outside the office. Why? I asked, still trying to process what was happening. Why would you offer this to someone you just met? Robert smiled, and for the first time since my phone had buzzed with Mark's messages, I felt something that might have been hope. Because talent is talent, Kenneth. And because Mark Peterson just made the stupidest business decision of his career. He fired his best employee via text message while that employee was sitting next to his biggest competitor. That's not just unprofessional. It's cosmically stupid. We talked for another 30 minutes as the stadium emptied around us. Robert explained Walker Industries' company culture, their client base, their growth projections. He told me about their Paris office, their expansion plans, their philosophy of promoting from within. Everything he described sounded like the company I'd imagined Peterson and Associates could become if it had been run by someone who valued people over politics. I'll need to do my due diligence, of course, Robert said, as we finally stood to leave. Background checks, reference calls, all the standard procedure. But assuming everything checks out, and I have no reason to think it won't, would you be interested in starting Monday? Monday. The same day Mark expected me to clean out my desk at Peterson and Associates. What about my non-compete clause? I asked, though part of me was already mentally composing my resignation letter. Robert's smile was predatory. Kenneth, you were just fired via text message. I'm fairly certain Mark Peterson voided any employment agreements when he decided to terminate you without cause or notice. But don't worry, our legal team will handle any issues that arise. I shook his hand, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt like I was making a business decision that was actually in my best interest. The flight back to New York was surreal. I spent most of it staring out the window, alternating between panic and excitement. Part of me kept waiting for Robert's offer to evaporate, for this to turn out to be some elaborate practical joke or fever dream. But every time I checked my email, there were new messages from Walker Industries' HR department, asking about start dates and salary negotiations and benefits packages. Jennifer picked me up at JFK, and I could see the concern in her eyes before I even reached the car. How was Paris? She asked, as I threw my luggage in the trunk. Life-changing, I said, and then spent the 40-minute drive home explaining everything that had happened. Jennifer listened without interrupting, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter when I got to the part about Mark's text messages, her expression brightening when I described Robert's offer. "So you're not upset that I got fired?" I asked as we pulled into our driveway. She turned to look at me, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "Kenneth, I've been waiting for you to leave that job for 3 years. I just never thought you'd actually do it." "I didn't do it. Mark did it for me." "No," Jennifer said firmly. "Mark created the opportunity. You chose to take it. There's a difference." Sarah was already asleep when we got home, but I snuck into her room anyway, just to watch her breathe for a few minutes. She'd taped a new drawing to her door while I was gone. Our family at a picnic, with everyone smiling, and a sun with an enormous grin shining down on us. In the drawing, Daddy was actually present. I made a promise to myself, standing in my daughter's doorway, that I would never again let work steal so much of my life that my own child had to draw pictures to remember what I looked like. Monday morning arrived with all the drama I'd been expecting. I woke up early, put on my best suit, and drove to Peterson and Associates one last time. Not to clean out my desk, I decided to handle that differently, but to have a conversation that was 8 years overdue. The office buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy. Colleagues rushing to meetings, phones ringing, the constant hum of productivity that I'd once found comforting. Now it just sounded like noise. Mark was in his office, visible through his glass door, talking animatedly on the phone. When he saw me approaching, his expression shifted from surprise to irritation to something that might have been nervousness. I knocked once and walked in without waiting for permission. "I'll call you back," Mark said into the phone, not taking his eyes off me. "Kenneth, I thought I was clear about our conversation." "You were," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk, like I'd done hundreds of times before. "Very clear. I'm here to discuss the transition." Mark frowned. "What transition?" "You clean out your desk. You turn in your laptop. You leave. End of transition." I pulled out my phone and opened my recording app. Mark's eyes widened as he realized what I was doing. "I want to make sure we're both clear on the details," I said calmly. "For instance, the Meridian Fitness campaign that increased their engagement by 300%. The Beaumont luxury strategy that Jake presented. The social media predictive algorithms that have been driving our Q2 numbers. I assume you'll be handling all of those accounts personally now." The color was draining from Mark's face. "Kenneth, what are you—" "Because here's the thing, Mark. When you fire someone via text message, you don't just lose their future contributions. You lose their institutional knowledge, their client relationships, their understanding of the systems they built." I leaned forward slightly. "Those algorithms I developed for predicting viral content, they're not just spreadsheets you can hand to someone else. They're custom code that I wrote, based on patterns I identified, using methodologies I developed. When I leave, that all leaves with me." Mark was very quiet now, and I could see him doing calculations in his head. Bad calculations, probably, but calculations nonetheless. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Nothing from you," I said, standing up. "I wanted to give you a professional courtesy that you didn't give me. I'm starting at Walker Industries this afternoon. I'll be taking the Meridian account with me, along with Beaumont Luxury and probably Richards and Associates. They've all expressed interest in working with me directly." This was a slight exaggeration. I hadn't actually contacted any clients yet. But Mark didn't need to know that. "You can't do that," Mark sputtered. "Your non-compete was voided when you terminated me without cause," I interrupted. Walker Industries' legal team was very clear on that point. Apparently, firing someone via text message while they're on vacation creates some interesting legal precedents. I headed for the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Mark? That evidence folder I've been keeping? The one with all the emails where you claimed credit for my work? I've decided not to share it with the industry trade publications. Consider it a going-away gift. I left him sitting there, with his mouth open and his phone in his hand, probably trying to figure out how to explain to his uncle that he'd just cost the family business about 40% of their revenue. The elevator ride down 32 floors felt like the longest and shortest trip of my life. By Wednesday, the industry gossip mill was in full swing. Word had gotten out that I'd joined Walker Industries, and apparently, Mark's reaction had been spectacular enough to become legendary among Manhattan marketing circles. According to Jake Martinez, who called me Tuesday night sounding panicked, Mark had spent Monday afternoon screaming at his assistant, trying to figure out how to contact clients without my password-protected files. "Kenneth, man, I think we're in trouble," Jake said, and I could hear genuine fear in his voice. "Mark's been asking me questions about the Meridian algorithms, and I don't even know what those words mean together." "That's not my problem anymore, Jake," I said, though I felt a twinge of sympathy for him. Jake was incompetent, but he wasn't malicious. He was just a guy who'd gotten in way over his head. "But you built all the systems. You know how everything works." Mark's talking about calling clients to explain transition procedures, and I don't think he knows what he's explaining. This was exactly what I'd been hoping would happen, though I tried to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "Jake, here's some free advice. Start updating your resume tonight." By Thursday, Meridian Fitness had called Walker Industries directly, asking if I could take over their account. Apparently, Mark's transition call had gone so badly that they'd lost confidence in Peterson and Associates entirely. Robert called me into his office with a grin that could have powered half of Manhattan. "Kenneth, I need you to know that in 25 years of business, I have never seen a competitor self-destruct this spectacularly," he said, settling behind his desk with obvious satisfaction. "Peterson and Associates has now lost 3 major clients in 4 days. Their stock price has dropped 12%. Mark Peterson is apparently telling people that a disgruntled employee sabotaged their systems, which is only making him look more incompetent." I should have felt triumphant. This was everything I'd fantasized about during those long nights at Peterson and Associates, watching Mark steal credit for my work while treating me like an interchangeable cog in his machine. Instead, I felt oddly empty. "Are you happy about this?" Robert asked, seeming to sense my conflicted feelings. "I thought I would be," I admitted. "For years, I wanted Mark to face consequences for how he treated people. I wanted him to realize that he needed me more than I needed him. But now that it's happening—" "You feel guilty," Robert finished, "because you're a decent person, Kenneth. That's part of what makes you good at this job. You understand that success isn't just about crushing your enemies. It's about building something better." He was right, of course. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel from Mark's downfall was being overshadowed by something much more meaningful. The realization that I was finally working somewhere that valued my contributions, treated me with respect, and understood that employees were human beings with lives outside the office. My first month at Walker Industries was everything Robert had promised and more. I had a team of 3 junior analysts who actually listened to my ideas and implemented them enthusiastically. I had a budget for professional development, access to cutting-edge analytics software, and most importantly, a boss who understood the difference between being productive and being present. For the first time in 8 years, I was home for dinner every night. I helped Sarah with her homework, read her bedtime stories, and taught her how to ride her bike in the park on Saturday mornings. Jennifer and I started having conversations about something other than my work schedule. We planned a real vacation, just the 3 of us, to Disney World with a strict no laptops policy. "Daddy, are you happier now?" Sarah asked one evening as I was tucking her into bed. "Much happier, princess. Why do you ask?" "Because you smile more, and you don't look at your phone during dinner anymore." Out of the mouths of babes. 3 months after starting at Walker Industries, I got a call that I'd been half expecting and half dreading. It was Mark Peterson, and he sounded like a man who'd been awake for several days straight. "Kenneth, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Hello, Mark. How's business?" There was a long pause. "You know how business is. You've been tracking our accounts." This was true. Walker Industries had picked up 4 former Peterson and Associates clients in the past month, and industry reports suggested they were hemorrhaging revenue at an unprecedented rate. "What can I do for you, Mark?" "I want you to come back." I almost laughed. "I'm sorry. What?" "I'm prepared to offer you a partnership track, equity in the company, your name on the door, salary of $150 plus bonuses tied to performance." It was a generous offer, especially coming from someone who'd fired me via text message just 3 months earlier. But it was also far too little, far too late. "Mark, I appreciate the offer, but I'm very happy where I am. Kenneth, please. I know I made mistakes. I know I didn't handle things well. But we can fix this. We can build something together." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Mark, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to take credit for my work. You chose to pass me over for promotions. You chose to fire me via text message while I was on vacation. Those weren't errors in judgment. They were decisions that reflected your values." "People change," he said desperately. "I can change." "Maybe you can," I agreed, "but I've already changed. I've learned what it's like to work somewhere that respects me, values my contributions, and treats me like a human being. I can't go back to accepting less than that." I hung up the phone and immediately called Jennifer to tell her about the conversation. She listened quietly, then asked the question I'd been asking myself. "Do you feel good about saying no?" "I feel free," I said, and realized that was exactly the right word. A year later, Jennifer and I were sitting in the same seats at Roland Garros, watching another French Open final. This time, Sarah was with us, eating French macarons and cheering every time someone hit the ball particularly hard. This time, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes or worrying about emails piling up while I was away. Robert had given me the week off for our family vacation, with explicit instructions not to even think about work until I got back to New York. "Daddy, this is the best vacation ever," Sarah announced, getting macaron crumbs all over her Roland Garros t-shirt. "Yes, it is," I agreed, putting my arm around Jennifer and watching our daughter experience the magic of live professional tennis. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for just a moment, I felt that old, familiar spike of anxiety. But it was just a photo from my team back in New York. They were at a company barbecue, celebrating the successful launch of our latest campaign. "Missing you, but enjoying the celebration," the message read. "Can't wait to hear about Paris when you get back." I showed the message to Jennifer, who smiled and shook her head. "It's still weird, isn't it? Having coworkers who actually seem to like each other." "Everything about this is weird," I admitted. "Good weird, but weird." As we watched the match continue on the famous clay courts of Roland Garros, I thought about that moment exactly 1 year ago when my old life had ended with a text message and my new life had begun with a conversation with a stranger. I thought about the choices that had led me here, some mine, some Mark's, some just the universe putting me in the right place at the right time. "Do you ever regret it?" Jennifer asked quietly, as if she'd been reading my thoughts. "Leaving Peterson and Associates? Never." "No, do you ever regret not fighting harder while you were there? Not standing up to Mark sooner?" It was a question I'd been wrestling with for months. Would things have been different if I'd been more assertive earlier? If I'd demanded credit for my work, pushed for promotions, refused to accept being marginalized? "I used to think so," I said finally. "But now, I think everything happened exactly the way it needed to. If Mark had been a better boss, if Peterson and Associates had been a healthier company, I might have stayed there forever. I might never have realized what I was worth, what I deserved. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you is also the best thing." Sarah looked up from her macarons with the serious expression she got when she was thinking about something important. "Daddy, is that why you always tell me that when something bad happens, I should look for the good thing hiding inside it?" "Exactly, Princess. Sometimes the good thing is hard to see at first, but it's usually there." "Yes." As the sun set over Roland Garros and the crowd cheered another spectacular point, I realized that I'd finally learned the difference between being successful and being happy. For 8 years, I'd confused the two, thinking that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself enough times, success would automatically translate into satisfaction. But sitting there with my wife and daughter, knowing that I had a job that respected me and a boss who valued my contributions, knowing that I could take a vacation without anxiety and come home to dinner with my family every night, that was happiness. That was the life I'd been working toward without even realizing it. My phone stayed silent for the rest of the match. Back in New York, Mark Peterson was probably still trying to explain to his uncle why Peterson and Associates' revenue had dropped 43% in 12 months. Back in New York, my team at Walker Industries was probably still celebrating our latest success. But for now, I was just Kenneth Thompson, sitting with his family at the French Open, watching incredible tennis and eating overpriced macarons and feeling grateful for the text message that had changed everything. "Daddy," Sarah said as we gathered our things to leave, "next year, can we come back?" "Absolutely," I promised. "Every year if you want." Because now I worked for a company that understood that life was meant to be lived, not just endured. And that made all the difference.